There are several theories that attempt to explain how we really learn. The big three are behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. And we'll also look at three extensions to constructivism. But beware, this is very, very oversimplified. So a learning theory tries to explain how and why we learn, but a learning theory is not the same as a teaching theory. A learning theory must, of course, include classroom learning, but also outside of school learning. How do babies learn? How do senior citizens learn? Even how do baby animals learn from their mothers? Or how does my thermostat learn as a machine learning system? So let's think more about the difference between learning and teaching. So teaching 30 students in a classroom, let's compare that to cooking for 30 patrons in a restaurant. The school's like a restaurant, the curriculum's like a menu, but the magic happens with the teacher or the chef combining kind of neutral ingredients into a really tasty meal or lesson for the diner or the student. Now, there's danger ahead because each theory that we'll explore captures only some truth. Each is incomplete. And by way of analogy, let's look at the blind men and the elephant story. One blind man faces an elephant from the front, touches its trunk, and says, "Oh, the elephant's like a thick snake." Another comes at it from the side. The elephant's leg, "Oh, it's like a big tree trunk." From the back, the elephant's tail, "No, the elephant's like a rope." Well, it's not that they're all wrong, but they're so incomplete as to be misleading. So our theories can be a little bit like that. The first is behaviorism. It was the first theory that attempted to be scientific, developed from roughly the 1920s to the 50s. It regarded the brain as just an empty vessel to be filled by education and society. The brain, though, was off limits to behaviorism because at that time there was no science, no mechanism, no idea to internally explore the workings of the brain. The best we had was introspection, which the behaviorists said was totally unreliable. So to be scientific, they agreed to only observe and measure external behavior. And their idea was that learning was affected by rewards, punishments, and lots of repetition. That learners were expected to be pretty much passive recipients of all of this. But in the 1950s, another model came along. Cognitivism is based on the idea that, computers are supposed to be like intelligent machines. That was the idea in the 1950s, and computer scientists took inputs, went into the computer for processing, and decisions were made based on things in its memory, and there was output. They said, isn't that a little bit like what the brain does? Could it be? So suddenly the doors were opened and it was permissible to think about what happened inside the brain, because computer scientists, being programmers, knew that the programming was the essence of the machine's intelligence. In the same way, they thought the programming of the brain was the essence to human intelligence. So computers expanded and evolved into neural networks and machine learning. Cognitive psychology expanded into cognitive neuroscience, which today remains a powerful way to investigate human learning. But they were all missing something so far. Both behaviorism and cognitivism had no way of expressing emotion, creativity, curiosity, passion. If you look at a baby crawling on the floor, child psychologist Jean Piaget in the 1950s recognized that that baby isn't a passive recipient of knowledge. It's crawling all over, exploring its environment. It's an active learner. And constructivism built the idea that, no, we are active learners actively constructing our knowledge. Any new knowledge doesn't just come into a blank slate. It's built upon what we have already learned. In this way, knowledge is personally meaningful because it's what we have encountered and been able to internalize. So every learner's path is different. The diagram to the left suggests that, if somebody knows about plants and water, there are ways that those things would connect in their brains. let's extend constructivism to actually building things to learn from. This comes initially from an idea of John Dewey, America's first educational psychologist, around 1900. The idea that learning from books is one thing, that's okay, but that's no substitute from learning with real-world things that have real-world consequences. You can touch them, you can see them, you can see if your ideas work. So the image, this photo was taken in 1968 with children programming the first computer language designed for children. And what they did was program that domed mobile robot to draw that geometric teddy bear. They used the Logo computer language, which was developed by the fellow on the bottom right, Dr. Seymour Papert, MIT computer scientist, who personally worked with child psychologist Jean Piaget to learn how children learn. He combined that with computer science. And the constructionism idea believes that with real-world projects, real-world problems, you get real-world feedback that's real. You can't just talk your way out of something. It works or it doesn't. It looks good or it doesn't. That it builds confidence and skills for kids to use in the real world. Papert went so far as to say, for a kid, a computer is an object to think with, just as accountants and computer scientists and biologists do. Papert's student, Mitch Resnick, the dark-haired fellow on the left, extended these ideas to develop the Scratch programming environment, used today by millions of students around the world. They use these ideas for kids to build projects, so project-based learning and maker spaces align closely to constructionism. Their idea of the teacher's job is not to provide ready-made knowledge, but rather to create an environment that supports invention and investigation. Well, so far, none of the systems have focused on people other than the learner. But since when is learning individual? Does any baby learn to speak all by itself, locked in a closet? Of course not. Humans are social animals. Learning is naturally, it's inherently social. Social learning is critical in the teen years where kids develop a social identity, and it helps prepare them to work in real-world teams in the workplace. Social constructivism has a deep scientific base, started in the 1910s and 20s by Russian psychologist Lev Vygotsky and his research. And that research has only been strengthened by modern neuroscience that has identified specific areas in the brain that are dedicated solely to our social interactions. So moving to today's interconnected world, George Siemens realized that we really need to look at a network of learning resources. He calls it a beautiful term, a learning ecology from which we all learn. This diagram is after his network, showing that all of these, this is an interconnected network in our brain. This includes formal learning like schools and mentors, informal, family, friends, coworkers, our experiences in the real world, in our basement, our backyard, our community, what our culture gives us, as well as our independent learning. There are many learning theories that by themselves appear to be incompatible, but taken together, they're okay. All of these theories are found in part in modern neuroscience. So none are totally wrong unless some theorist says, oh, my theory's right and all the others are wrong. That would be an error. Learning theory is not the same as teaching theory, but understanding learning theory can help a teacher be more effective. And theories are useful, but they're all incomplete. None are adequate to capture the complexity of human learning.